the floating oil, and the birds would fly over, see the fish on top of the oil, hit it, and pop up and be covered in oil. If they weren't too oiled, they'd fly back to the nest, and they'd either sit on the chicks or sit on the eggs. And what ended up happening was they transfer that oil to the chicks and the eggs, and of course they later would all die. We just couldn't pick up the birds fast enough with the number of birds that were out there. Of course, there were dead fish everywhere. Dolphins that, of course, were dying out there as well. We had it was just total chaos when you went out there and watched the number of animals dying and floating in the oil. It was gut-wrenching.
Keith Jones, when all this logistical stuff's happening, when it's all over the news and it's all about how to stop the oil reaching the land and to cause an ecological disaster, you had other family preoccupations, didn't you? You were coming to terms with what was happening in your family.
One of the hard lessons I learned through all this, and there were an awful lot of them, but when 9/11 happened and the Twin Towers were struck and went down, for weeks, maybe, I guess months afterwards, crews were going through the wreckage, and every time they found any amount of human tissue, it was carefully preserved and taken to be genetically typed and matched so they could know which one of the victims it was from. I admit, back then I thought, gee whiz, isn't that an awful lot of going on? But after we lost Gordon and we had nothing, not a fingernail, then I understood. We had nothing to bury. There's a grave marker in Baton Rouge, aside from the fact that Gordon's name is on it, there's nothing of him there. 3 weeks after Gordon was killed, Michelle gave birth to their second son, Max. And that was the most bittersweet moment of my life. Maybe God had a hand in it, that Max looks just like his dad, just like him.
I'm Kirsty Wark, and this is the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in The Reunion. You're listening to the BBC World Service.
This is the BBC World Service, home of in-depth news and current affairs.
When we're looking at the problems, not a single one can be solved by any one country acting alone.
This is a moment in time for our common humanity.
Twice a day, every day. Interviews, news and analysis.
Yes, they are angry, but we got a real sense of how shocked they are.
Get the full story from our journalists.
There was some speculation that a new conflict might be about to start.
They're well-trained and heavily armed.
And eyewitnesses.
The situation here is getting worse and worse.
The debate is not anymore whether climate change is real or not. The debate is how seriously are we going to take this.
The day's events from around the world and sometimes above it.
A couple hundred miles below you, the Earth itself. Some of the space station astronauts comment about feeling like they're going to tumble out of the hatch and fall.
NewsHour, Monday to Friday at 13 and 20 GMT.
Coming up in the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, engineers continue their battle to cap the well.
I was not in favor of removing that cap. I was going to hold that position even if it meant my job.
And one man realizes he's in the firing line.
From the time I was indicted, it was just trauma and stress every day.
That's part 2 of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, The Reunion, with me, Kirsty Wark, coming up on the BBC World Service.
BBC News with Neil Nunes. Hong Kong's leading pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily has confirmed that its last edition will be published on Thursday. The closure comes after police raided its offices last week and seized over $2 million worth of assets. Its owners and other executives have also been arrested. In another development, the first person charged under Hong Kong's national security law, Tong Ying Kit, has pleaded not guilty at his trial in front of 3 judges. A second round of UN-sponsored Libyan peace talks is beginning in Berlin, months after a new national unity government was formed. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is taking part, alongside representatives from Russia, Turkey, France, and Egypt. An Ethiopian government airstrike on a market in Tigray is reported to have caused heavy casualties. Dozens of people are being treated in hospital in the regional capital Mekelle, but medical staff say they have been blocked from going to the scene of the attack. At least 5 civilians have been killed in a roadside bomb blast in the southern Afghan province of Kandahar. Officials said 20 others, including women and children, were injured when their vehicle was hit. Elsewhere, the Taliban said they have captured 6 more districts across Afghanistan. Health officials in Israel are due to present the government with possible steps to try to curb a new rise in coronavirus cases. The doctor in charge of the pandemic response has suggested bringing back the obligation to wear masks indoors. And the organizers of the Tokyo Olympics have said they'll have to come up with creative ways to generate a party atmosphere for spectators after unveiling tough new COVID restrictions. Alcohol, hugs, and cheering have all been banned, along with talking loudly. BBC News.
You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Kirsty Wark. Welcome back as we continue the story of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Reunion. Joining me are 5 people whose lives were changed by the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Keith Jones' son Gordon was an engineer on Deepwater Horizon. Bob Kaluza, one of 2 BP supervisors on the Deepwater Horizon that night. Admiral Thad Allen, who as National Incident Commander was in charge of the federal response, P.J. Han, who was then Director of Coastal Zone Management for Plaquemine Parish, Louisiana, and Mark Mazzella, well control expert with BP.
For the first time now, we can actually see the leak in the BP oil well down there on the seabed.
BP made a live feed from the camera on the ocean floor available to the public. It became known as the Spill Cam. Reporter Adam Brooks.
BP's dogged attempts to cap the leak go on. A second try at lowering a containment dome over the leaking oil is getting underway.
BP Chief Operating Officer Doug Settles.
This hasn't been done before. It's very complex, and it will likely have challenges along the way.
BP was struggling to close the well and to explain how the accident had happened in the first place.
An initial investigation has found that a crucial piece of equipment called the blowout preventer, which should have capped the well, failed. It was wrongly configured and had a dead battery.
In Congress, anger was growing.
This sure fits, in my view, a pattern of serious safety and environmental problems at BP.
Meanwhile, there were more grim images coming from Louisiana.
We came here yesterday morning and checked and see they have no oil at all, and then we came back this morning and this is what you see now.
It's like peanut butter or fudge.
For oyster harvesters, Floyd Lestrange and Chris Hernandez, their worst fears were realized.
This area, everything is dead. Nothing could survive in this.
Louisiana Congressman Charles Mélenchon gave an emotional appearance at a hearing on Capitol Hill.
Our culture is threatened, our coastal economy is threatened, and everything that I know and love is at risk. These are America's wetlands.
By the 26th of May, BP's best hope of plugging the leak rested on pumping heavy drilling fluid down the well in an operation called Top Kill.
Vessels on the surface of the sea carry pipes that will be lowered deep into the ocean.
Al Jazeera reporter John Terrett.
The pipes will shoot a heavy mud mixture into the broken riser, hopefully killing off the high-pressure jet of oil spurting out of the ground. Cement will be used to seal it off.
Admiral Thad Allen, sent in by the White House, joined CNN's Wolf Blitzer.
Here's the blunt question. Is Top Kill this week going to work?
We certainly hope it will. Nothing's a sure thing, and we found that out throughout this response. There are times where we've had technical problems to overcome, but we're certainly hopeful. Nobody's more hopeful than I am.
Well, we heard Admiral Allen there, but coming to Mark Mazzella, what was your feeling about Top Kill? Did you have Admiral Allen's 60-70% chance of success? Was that your view as well?
Well, I'll say this. Top Kill is a procedure that we initiate on almost every blowout. The thing about it is, we didn't know how big a hole we had. So the amount of material that we pumped was equivalent to what fits in the back of an 18-wheeler truck. So it was just an unbelievable amount of material. In all fairness, the success rate is usually pretty good. The problem here was it's never been done in 5,000 foot of water.
Admiral Allen.
I established the criteria that the relief well would have to be drilled, and they would have to seal the well at the bottom by the reservoir for it to be truly sealed. But en route to doing that, anything we could do to stop it, we were going to try. You would not believe the recommendations I got and people that tried to help me fix the problem, including, and I think it was a university professor someplace that proposed we should put a nuclear device down the well.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, it will. There were a lot of people offering suggestions like that, and unfortunately, it came to me and a couple of others to explore some of that stuff, but they wanted to take a submarine and turn it up on its nose and fire it down the wellbore.
Oh, God.
I can tell you as a national incident commander that was not going to happen.
I think. Well, we didn't think so, but, hey, we had to treat everybody like they were trying to help.
And PJ Han, when all this was going on, your people, volunteers, workers, were engaged in other operations.
We were. We had obviously boots on the ground trying to do what we could. I remember at one point, one of the guys that were out there in a boat, one of the local guys had a generator and a wet vac, and he showed me how he was sucking up the oil with this generator and wet vac. And I called Billy Nungesser over because some of the equipment that they had 8, 9, 10 people that deployed to work on trying to get up a section of oil, and they weren't picking up hardly any of the oil with these systems that looked like Fred Flintstone car. They had this drum that rolled around in front of the oil in it, and then a little squeegee that would squeegee the oil off of it. And at the end of the day, they had little to nothing to show for it. And Billy gave me his credit card. He said, go buy every generator and wet vac you can get on the shelf of Lowe's and Home Depot. And we did, and brought them back. And the national news came out and actually saw the amount of oil we were picking up using these shop vacs and generators. And we got a letter from the president of Shop Vac to cease and desist because it's not the way it's supposed to be used. But we went on with it anyway and continued to use it.
Meanwhile, you also had so many fishing families' livelihoods, you had canneries, you had all these issues to think about because the economy was going to be so badly affected.
We had people that had everything they had tied up into their boats, families that generation after generation, they knew nothing other than fishing. And, Louisiana, of course, is second only to Alaska in seafood production. One of the things they began doing is they got a hold of Corexit. Now, Corexit was stored, we found out later, in containers in other countries and brought in and began using it in the Gulf. It was banned everywhere else, and of course, now they're dumping it on us.
What's Corexit?
Corexit was a chemical they used. It's a dispersing agent that together mixed with the oil became toxic to the environment. We had met with Lisa Jackson, who was the EPA director at the time, and we'd asked her when we learned what it was to stop spraying. And she had agreed to at that point when she was at her office to stop spraying. And then we found out at night they were taking flights out of Mississippi and continuing to spray it and doing it at night to sink the oil. So we were outraged. I mean, we were not happy with the direction that the Coast Guard and that BP was taking in the way they were handling this oil spill.
What do you say to that, Admiral Allen?
Well, I got those complaints as we went through the spill. We were approaching 1 million gallons of dispersant used, and there was incomplete science about the interaction of the oil, especially at various depths in the Gulf, and what the impact was on that. But at the time, it was a tool we had, and it was authorized. These conversations went all the way to the Oval Office. But you're trying to solve one problem, it's not well understood by another problem. All this had to do with dealing with the public. And the politics is like the weather. It's there and you got to deal with it.
PG Han.
We were out, I was with National Geographic, who stayed with me the entire time, Joel Sartori, as well as Gerald Herbert with the Associated Press. And we came up across a pelican that was soaking in oil, and we made the call to try to get the bird picked up. After an hour of waiting and nobody showing up and the bird started going under, I was like, you know what, I'm not waiting. I got out of the boat and I went over there and I grabbed the bird, covered it in oil, and as I pulled it out, they began taking pictures. And when that picture came out that evening, I looked at it and we all talked about it in the boat when I looked on the back of this camera. I was like, when this picture hits, we're going to get so much help because the outrage from the public when they see this picture. It was right after that we got the 90-foot boom ruling that if you're within 90 feet of the boom, it's going to be a felony. And it was basically a death sentence to a lot of the birds because you'd see the birds. And in fact, the captain I was with said, like, there's a bird right there. He said, it's too close to the boom. We can't get to it. I'm like, go get the bird. Get me in there. I'm getting the bird. And I collected a bunch of birds going in and out of the boom, next to the booms, on the side of the boom. And if I had anybody out there to help, I brought them in with me. And I told them, I said, look, I'll take the felony over losing all the stuff we have out here.
Just coming to you, Bob Kaluza, do you think that BP's failure was in management? And actually, when we look at the massive profits, that it was too profit-driven?
The direct cause of the blowout is a management system failure. And so to answer your question, yes, this was a management system failure.
Keith Jones.
When the President's Commission rendered their report on the causes of the blowout, they found that primarily the engineers in Houston who were directing what went on the rig had made 26 consecutive decisions, each one of which made a blowout more likely and saved BP money. And I think they all had one eye on the Deepwater Horizon and the other eye on their year-end bonus.
Tony Hayward was the contrite public face of BP, but some of his appearances made things worse.
The first thing to say is we're sorry. We're sorry for the massive disruption it's caused to their lives. And, there's no one who wants this thing over more than I do. I'd like my life back.
Telling a reporter he'd like to get his life back inflamed an already angry American public. A group calling itself Seize BP called for the company to be stripped of its assets.
From their bonus checks. The only way to go forward is for the seizure of BP's assets, for the creation of a trust to pay all compensation.
I make it very clear.
Secretary of State for the Interior, Ken Salazar, addressed the media outside the crisis center in Houston.
BP is charged with capping their leaking oil well and paying for the response and for the recovery without limitation. They will be held accountable. We will keep our boot on their neck until the job gets done.
Meanwhile, well control experts were still fighting to contain the spill, and there were concerns over BP's financial reserves. BBC reporter Jane Hill.
The cleanup so far has cost more than $680 million. Can BP survive all of this?
Critics are now talking about your style, which is the first time...
But there was also growing criticism of President Obama. Matt Lauder of NBC.
This is not the time to meet with experts and advisors. This is a time to spend more time in the Gulf, and I never thought I'd say this to a president, but kick some butt.
And I don't sit around just talking to experts because this is a college seminar. We talk to these folks because they potentially have the best answers, so I know who's asked to kick.
Mark Mazzella, what's your reaction to the Secretary of the Interior, Ken Salazar's relay of Barack Obama's instruction to keep the boot on the neck of BP?
Well, I remember the conversation. We were having a meeting with Mr. Salazar, and he was quite animated about what he wanted done, and we explained to him that we wanted it taken care of just as much as everyone else. And of course, when we left the meeting, we were all cordial about it all, but there for a little bit, boy, it was pretty tough.
Did you feel the boot on your neck?
Not on my neck, because I was a lot bigger than him.
And Bob Kaluza, when all this is going on, you have a realization that you are in the firing line here. You're one of two people in the firing line, one of only two BP employees that faced criminal charges. Can you tell me what your life was like at that moment?
Well, this incident occurred, of course, on April 20th, 2010, and I was indicted on November 14th of 2012. So in that 2-year span, I didn't feel I was in any kind of legal jeopardy at all. Then on November 14th, the day before Eric Holder made his announcement about the BP guilty plea agreement, I was indicted. And I was indicted for 22 felony counts and a misdemeanor, where I could have spent 199 years in prison. My life changed significantly, not only with the stress and trauma, but now my name was in the newspapers, and I knew we hadn't done anything wrong, so this was just was something that I have to go through now that I'd never gone through in my life. So I just said, we're going to go through this and we're going to win. And that's exactly what we did.
But the suggestion was that it all came down to what? The last pressure test you did?
That was one of the things they said. I was indicted for 3 things. First, they said that we negligently conducted this negative test. They also said we didn't contact people on shore. And then they said we didn't use applicable duty of care. There's no standard for negative testing. So how can you have any kind of an applicable duty of care?
Do you think that BP were hanging you out to dry?
Well, now I do. Yes. I think when Barack Obama said he's looking for whose ass to kick, BP were almost forced to start to look at the people who they could possibly sacrifice.
And Keith Jones, what did you make of these charges which were being levelled at Bob Kaluza?
First of all, I want to point out, as Mr. Kaluza just referred to, BP pled guilty to 11 counts of seaman's manslaughter. Pled guilty, but it was obvious after that, and I sat through the whole civil trial. I heard all of BP's engineers who testified. They never admitted to doing anything wrong, but they did want to throw Mr. Vadrine and Mr. Kaluza under the bus on the negative pressure test, which I think may have been referred to as number 26 of the 26 consecutive things that BP did wrong. So, Mr. Kaluza, I never thought that you should have been charged with a crime. I thought it was wrong when you were, and I was relieved when they were dismissed against you. And I'm glad I've got a chance to tell you that.
Oh, thank you. And of course, I can't even relate to your loss at all. And I worked, these guys that I work with out there, I worked on drilling rigs for 17 years. And so they're like a family. We never, ever consider, we would never do anything to harm, we'll try not to ever harm anybody, certainly not put them in any kind of jeopardy where they would perish.
Admiral Allen, one phrase from Tony Haywood, wanting to get his life back. Do you remember what you were thinking after he said that?
I used to tell people there are 40,000 people working this problem down there would like to have their life back, probably including Thad Allen. And it wasn't a matter of what he said was true or not, it just wasn't appropriate.
Mark Mazzella.
You know, the whole thing about wanting our lives back, we all wanted that. Everybody did. But the reality is there's a lot of moving parts to an operation like this.
Chairman Waxman, Chairman Stewart, Chairman...
2 months after the blowout, BP's CEO, Tony Hayward, gave evidence at a congressional hearing. He was confronted by angry members of the public. Hayward issued a fulsome apology.
The explosion and fire aboard the Deepwater Horizon and the resulting oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico never should have happened, and I'm deeply sorry that it did. We said all along...
BP agreed to set up a $20 billion fund to pay compensation and the costs of the cleanup.
We will not rest until we make this right. We're a strong company and no resources will be spared.
Shortly after midnight on the 4th of August, the well finally obtained static condition. Oil stopped flowing out of it. David Shookman again.
In an operation known as static kill, heavy drilling fluid has been pumped into the well and is now holding the oil in check.
3 weeks later, American government scientists came to the surprising conclusion that as much as 3/4 of the oil that had leaked out had now been either dispersed or dealt with.
Speaking on US television, President Obama's environment advisor Carol Browner said of the oil, it was captured, it was skimmed, it was burnt, it was contained. Mother Nature did her part.
Today's resolution.
The U.S. Attorney General announced a criminal inquiry into the Deepwater Horizon spill. In November 2012, Eric Holder travelled to New Orleans with a settlement in hand. Washington reporter Michelle Fleury.
BP has pleaded guilty to 14 criminal charges, 11 of them for misconduct and negligence resulting in the deaths of workers. The company will pay a total of $4.5 billion in fines and compensation. 2 BP employees have also been charged with manslaughter, and another faces charges of obstruction of Congress and false statements.
For Jason Gamble from the Macquarie Group and other BP investors, at least some of the uncertainty had now been removed.
I think it's very important for BP to put this behind them and be able to talk about the strategy of an ongoing company and for this to become an oil company again, rather than essentially a big risk.
Mark Mazzala, I have to come to you on this. What was it like the moment you realised you had successfully stopped the oil?
Well, it was with mixed emotion, to be honest with you. The cap was installed and the well shut in. And, of course, after it was shut in, there was a group that wanted to open it back up. They were afraid we were going to rupture the casing. Our findings didn't suggest that, but it was coming from some folks that were highly educated that were brought in to oversee us and to look at some of the things we were doing.
But if they had insisted on opening up again, what would you have done?
My team and I had already communicated to the leadership that we wouldn't do it.
Admiral Allen, who was it that wanted it opened?
I think Mark and I should go somewhere and have an adult beverage on this one. There was a technical group headed by the Secretary of Energy, Secretary Chu, that had brought people down from the national labs at the request of the president to give a technical point of view and give a second opinion to the president about what was going on. But I pretty much came down where Mark was at. I was not in favor of removing that cap, and I was going to hold that position even if it met my job.
You kind of had nothing to lose. You were retiring. You could just say it like it was.
I have told many, many people you should never take a job like this unless you're prepared to be fired.
PJ Han, though, you had different preoccupations because we heard there the comment on the tape about Mother Nature has done her best, Mother Nature's taking her course. Did it feel like that to you, that Mother Nature had solved the problem?
No, absolutely not. There are organisms out there that will eat the oil eventually, not that much oil. Besides losing a lot of wildlife, I mean, of course, we lost a lot of land. What happens is it's called shadowing as the oil lands on land. As if you put a piece of plywood out on your yard and pick it up a week later, the grass is going to be dead underneath it. And that was what was happening all along our coast, was that the oil came across the marsh, covered up the marsh, and shadowed the marsh and would kill the marsh. And once you lose the root system, then that gets broken up and you lose the land underneath it. So I think it's going to be a number of years before we actually realize how much of an impact it did have. We did know that pogey fish out in the Gulf since 1968 that they'd been studying became smaller. These are small fish that they catch for dog food, cat food, and the oils are used in makeup. Anyway, the pogey fish were smaller, and some of them had no roe. We did notice that a lot of dolphins that were aborting the dolphins early. So I know the studies are still going on. I don't know that we're going to fully understand and learn all the impacts that the oil spill had on us besides the wildlife and the land that we lost.
Bob Kaluza, what did the threat of, as you said, 199 years in jail, what impact did that have on you?
From the time I was indicted, it was just trauma and stress every day. I met with attorneys all the time. We worked on our defense all the time. And each day, you just wake up with the same thing, stress and trauma. You're likely going to go to trial. I wanted to go to trial. I wanted the truth to come out. The truth has now finally come out.
Your co-accused colleague, your late colleague, decided to plead guilty to the misdemeanor, which was a lesser charge, and you fought on, even though it was so stressful.
Well, Don Bedreen had medical issues, so he wanted this to be over with. When the government, when the Department of Justice realized that they don't have much of a case. All the felony charges have either been dismissed or dropped. They're down to one misdemeanor. There wasn't much of a penalty. And Don probably said, I just want this to end.
Keith Jones, from your point of view, your son was not directly employed by BP. He was a subcontractor. But has BP ever said anything to you since the Deepwater Horizon disaster, since your son died?
No. And I never expected an apology from BP, but we never heard, we're sorry Gordon was killed on our rig. We're sorry you lost your son. You have our condolences. Not a card, not flowers, nothing.
Keith Jones, I am truly sorry that your son perished. Truly.
Thank you.
I can't even relate to how that would affect your family. But for me, I asked my attorneys if, before we won, I said, will I ever get a letter of apology from the U.S. Department of Justice? And they chuckled, actually, and said, no, that's the Department of Justice. They're not going to give you an apology. Since the acquittal, I've never heard anything from BP. I'm truly relieved that it's finally over with, but also kind of disgusted that it actually happened. So that's how I feel right now.
Mark Mazzella, of course, you don't work for BP anymore, but I wonder if you think there was something wrong with that culture that somehow stopped people apologising, even just offering condolences.
It's one of the most uncomfortable things you can do, especially if you are a part of that.
True.
You know, I struggle with it myself. You know, I was part of the fix to the thing, and I feel responsible. But the reality is, and you know, I've lost a child myself. I know the hurt, and man, nothing anybody can say is going to make you feel better.
That's true.
But there's that human piece in it that says, you know, we've got to care for everybody, and we've got to care for our fellow humans, and it's good to say, I'm sorry.
Keith Jones, Bob Kaluza, Admiral Thad Allen, P.G. Han, and Mark Mazzella, thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very welcome.
You've been listening to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, The Reunion, with me, Kirsty Warg. The programme was produced by Emily Williams, and the series producer is David Prest. It was a Whistledown production for the BBC World Service.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, and here's what's happening in the studio this week.
South African wax sculpture artist Lungelo Gumede creates hyper-realistic statues of African and black icons. Follow Lungelo as he works on a project near and dear to his heart, a wax statue of anti-apartheid leader Nelson Mandela.
In the studio at bbcworldservice.com/in-the-studio. And in an hour, Outlook with Emily Webb.
Today, a survivor of Chechnya's gay purge speaks out. Armin Jabrailov was working as a hairdresser when he was snatched from his salon, taken to a warehouse and tortured. After his release, he fled his home, his country, and became the first Chechen to speak publicly about his ordeal.
The newsroom is next on the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
BBC World Service, it's 10 o'clock GMT. This is Oliver Conway with the newsroom. Hong Kong's leading pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily confirms it will cease publication this week as Communist China tightens its grip.
It's absolutely devastating and actually rather heartbreaking. Not just the end of the only Chinese language pro-democracy newspaper in Hong Kong, but it's really the death of media freedom.
Also on the newsroom, Sydney raises its alert level after 30 COVID cases.
At hospitality venues, no vertical consumption. All people must be seated wherever you are at any setting. We do not want mingling. Mingling will mean transferring the virus.
New Zealand also imposes new restrictions. And later. Sonic the Hedgehog at 30, but the video game character is showing no sign of slowing down. First, our top stories.
Hello, I'm Neil Nunes with the BBC News. Hong Kong's leading pro-democracy newspaper, Apple Daily, has confirmed that its last edition will be published on Thursday. The closure comes after police raided its offices last week, seizing assets and arresting top executives. Martin Yip is in Hong Kong.
This is really the end of the single biggest media outlet of the pro-democracy camp, the end of an era. Many people have been expecting it to come somehow because back in around March, there's been widespread rumors that the government would take it down by the first anniversary of the introduction of the national security law. And this year, more importantly, is the centenary of the ruling Communist Party.
Ethiopian warplanes are reported to have bombed a market in the northern Tigray region, killing and wounding dozens of people. Catherine Bierehangas reports now from Addis Ababa.
Doctors at the main hospital in Tigray's capital, Mekelle, say they're treating dozens of people, including a 2-year-old child, injured by the airstrike on Tuesday. But medical personnel say they have been blocked from reaching the site of the attack to help others left behind. Eyewitnesses told the BBC that the Ethiopian Air Force struck a marketplace just 25 kilometers away from Mekelle. The military denies allegations it targeted civilians.
The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said the ceasefire agreement in Libya must be fully implemented and all foreign forces withdrawn from the country. Mr. Blinken was speaking in Berlin, where he's attending a second round of UN-sponsored Libyan peace talks.
We share the goal of a sovereign, stable, unified, secure Libya, free from foreign interference. It's what the people of Libya deserve. It's critical to regional security as well. For that to happen, national elections need to go forward in December, and that means urgent agreement is needed on constitutional and legal issues that would undergird those elections. And the October 23rd ceasefire agreement has to be fully implemented, including by withdrawing all foreign forces from Libya.
The European Commission is to challenge Hungary over recently passed legislation that would ban what Budapest calls the promotion of homosexuality and gender change to under-18s. The Commission's head, Ursula von der Leyen, said it would raise its legal concerns with Budapest. She described the bill as shameful and a violation of fundamental EU values. Meanwhile, Germany's foreign minister has joined the criticism of European football's governing body for refusing to allow Munich Stadium to be illuminated in rainbow colors for tonight's clash between Germany and Hungary. World News from the BBC. Health officials in Israel are due to present the government with possible steps to try to curb a new rise in coronavirus cases. The doctor in charge of the pandemic response, Nachman Ash, has suggested that one measure may be to bring back the obligation to wear masks indoors. Top health officials say that the current rise in infections is linked to people bringing in the Delta variant when they return from abroad. Israel has led the way in vaccinating its citizens against the virus and is lifting its restrictions. Iran has described the U.S. seizure of 36 Iran-linked news websites as not constructive for talks aimed at reviving the 2015 nuclear deal. The websites include the government's English-language channel Press TV and its Arabic channel Al-Alam. Domains associated with Iranian-backed groups in Iraq were also targeted. Visitors to the sites were greeted by statements referring to U.S. sanctions laws and the seals of the FBI and Department of Commerce. The director of the Iranian president's office, Mahmoud Vaizi, said the American action was ill-timed and wrong.
We are using all international and legal means to act accordingly, to condemn this action and expose to the public this mistaken policy of the United States, which does not appear to be constructive when talks about a deal on the nuclear issue are underway.
The organizers of the Tokyo Olympics say they'll have to come up with creative ways to generate a party atmosphere for spectators after unveiling tough new COVID restrictions. Alcohol, hugs, and cheering have all been banned, along with talking loudly. The Tokyo 2020 president told reporters spectators could feel joy in their hearts, but they could not express it loudly. BBC News.
Thank you very much. You're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with Oliver Conway. When Hong Kong was handed back to China in 1997, it was supposed to be allowed more freedom than the mainland, under the slogan, "One country, two systems." But in recent years, the Chinese Communist Party has moved to tighten its grip over the city. A key element has been the national security law imposed a year ago, which gave the authorities sweeping powers to stamp out any dissent. Today, the first person charged under that law has gone on trial, accused of driving a motorbike into a group of police officers. At the same time, the clampdown on opposition voices in the territory has resulted in Hong Kong's pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily shutting down. The head of the London-based group Hong Kong Watch, Benedict Rogers, who used to work as a journalist in Hong Kong and has contributed to Apple Daily.
It's absolutely devastating and actually rather heartbreaking news. It is not just the end of the only pro-democracy newspaper, certainly Chinese language pro-democracy newspaper in Hong Kong, but it's really the death of media freedom. And I think that we need to be prepared in the months to come to see the other remaining smaller pro-democracy outlets who are critical of the regime potentially affected as well.
Well, let's talk more to our Asia-Pacific editor, Celia Hatton. Celia, first of all, take us through the demise of Apple Daily and what it means for the territory.
Well, it really has been a systematic shutdown we've been witnessing really over the past few years. Of course, since that national security law was imposed by Beijing last year, we've seen persistent police threats, then that upped to, really targeting Jimmy Lai, the founder of Apple Daily, that really he was an unyielding figure, really a protector of the pro-democracy movement. He was really targeted, his assets frozen. He's now behind bars under and facing even more challenges. He could face life in prison. And then I think the authorities really went after the organization itself, finally freezing its assets so it couldn't accept payments or give payments to its staff, and it really couldn't go on any longer.
And what does that mean for Hong Kong?
Well, let's go to an old Chinese expression, killing the chicken to scare the monkeys. They've taken down the go-to source for information and encouragement during the pro-democracy protests. Once that source is gone, effectively other media outlets that had leanings towards the pro-democracy movement, or frankly outlets that just wanted to remain independent, are really now going to be terrified, and it's going to be very difficult for them to continue on now that Apple Daily is going to be going. And so it's not just the death of media freedom, it's just the death of any kind of outspokenness in Hong Kong.
And part of that effort to control Hong Kong in terms of the communist authorities is that national security law, and we've seen the first person go on trial under that legislation.
That's right. Tong Ying Kit is a man who's accused of flying a protest flag, a pro-democracy protest flag, on the back of his motorcycle and then driving in to a group of police officers. He was the first person charged under that national security law just hours after it came into effect. He's pleading not guilty. Now, he's facing dangerous driving charges on one hand, but he's also facing charges of terrorism and secession. And really, people are looking to see whether the court is able to target the fact that he was carrying this flag. The flag had a very popular pro-democracy slogan on it, "Liberate Hong Kong, Revolution of Our Times." People are watching this trial very closely to see if it's possible that the law can be used to target that slogan in particular, because that's just going to be another way to silence people from speaking out and voicing opposition to the authorities in Beijing.
Our Asia-Pacific editor, Celia Hatton, thank you. With live concerts and near-full sports stadiums, Australia and New Zealand have largely avoided the coronavirus restrictions seen elsewhere in the world. But when outbreaks do occur, no matter how small, the authorities act fast, imposing snap lockdowns and travel restrictions. That's what's happened in the New Zealand city of Wellington after one Australian visitor tested positive for coronavirus. At the same time, in Australia itself, Sydney is grappling to contain a relatively small cluster of cases. The Premier of New South Wales, Gladys Berejiklian, has announced new restrictions.
No more than 5 visitors per household, including children. At hospitality venues, no vertical consumption. All people must be seated wherever you are at any setting. We do not want mingling. Mingling will mean transferring the virus. So please make sure all consumption at hospitality venues or otherwise or at events has to be seated and with good social distancing.
Well, to find out more about the restrictions in both countries, I spoke to our correspondent in Sydney, Shaima Khalil, and started by asking her about the lockdown over the Tasman Sea in New Zealand.
Well, we know that a visitor from Sydney arrived in Wellington on the 19th of June on a Qantas flight, and he stayed there until the 21st, and then he came back to Sydney on an Air New Zealand flight. The health authorities in New Zealand have said that the visitor, the man, was most likely infected before he came to New Zealand, so all passengers on those 2 flights are now considered close contacts. They've all been contacted, asked to test and to isolate. But he's also been to several locations while in Wellington with his partner. He's had at least 4 close contacts there. So as precautionary measures, we've now heard from health authorities in New Zealand saying that they're going to go to a level 2 restrictions, just the capital city, which means not necessarily restrictions of movement, but the usual of masks now being mandatory again, social distancing, advice to work from home when possible, a cap on under 100 people in many venues, again, just to make sure that wherever he was doesn't spread the virus within the city.
But travel stopped temporarily, at least between Australia and New Zealand. Meanwhile, people in Sydney are banned from leaving that city. What's happening there?
That's right. We can't go anywhere. And that's because the cluster within Sydney has now risen to nearly 40 people. That's the eastern suburbs cluster. And there is concern now with more locations and more exposure sites being added on the New South Wales health list. It means that it is spreading, and it's spreading not just at a fast rate, but also, as health authorities here put it, with fleeting contacts. So people don't even have to be together for enough time. It could be that you're just in the same place with a person with a Delta variant and you get the virus. And so the advice now, the health advice, is that people in Greater Sydney are not allowed to travel anywhere. I mean, anyway, the other states were quick to react, closing their borders to people from mainly 7 districts, if you will, or 7 main areas within city. These are now considered hotspots. And so generally the advice is don't travel outside Sydney. And of course, with the school holidays coming up here, that's going to disrupt travel as is, because with no international travel, most holiday makers here have been traveling domestically, and that won't happen for people in Sydney.
Now, we keep seeing these snap lockdowns in New Zealand and Australia for what would look like elsewhere in the world to be a tiny number of infections. Are these strategies sustainable, or are we just going to see Australia and New Zealand close themselves off indefinitely?
That's been the question that many have been asking, especially with the border issue, especially with so many people unable to see loved ones, or so many Australians are unable to come back. And I think the answer has always been from the authorities that because these 2 countries have been so successful in controlling and eliminating the virus sometimes, that these small numbers, comparatively speaking to the rest of the world, mean so much locally and domestically. But it also means that authorities want to get on them as soon as they can, as aggressively as they can, so they can contain them. I would say, though, another big issue here in Australia and in New Zealand to a similar extent is the vaccination issue. I think this has really been controversial. I guess because of the success of those 2 countries, the vaccination rollout has been very, very slow, and to be honest, quite shambolic sometimes here.
And that was Shaima Khalil in Sydney. Just a bit of breaking news coming in from Spain. Catalan separatist leaders pardoned by the Spanish government yesterday have started leaving prison. Their former Catalan speaker, Carme Forcadell, was the first leader to be freed from a prison in Barcelona after leaving. She demanded a full amnesty to benefit to those who are also in self-imposed exile. There was a small crowd of supporters waving Catalan flags outside that prison in Barcelona. You're listening to The Newsroom from the BBC World Service. A reminder of our headlines from Neil.
Hong Kong's leading pro-democracy newspaper, Apple Daily, has confirmed it will cease publication this week after the authorities froze its bank accounts. An Ethiopian government airstrike on a market in Tigray is reported to have caused heavy casualties. And world powers are meeting in Berlin to seek a lasting peace settlement for Libya, including the withdrawal of foreign military forces.
Yeah, we'll have more on that in a moment. But first, the German foreign minister has joined criticism of European football's governing body UEFA for refusing to allow Munich Stadium to be illuminated in rainbow colours for tonight's clash between Germany and Hungary. Heiko Maas said it was true that football pitches weren't about politics, but they were about people, fairness and tolerance. Siobhan Leahy has this report.
On Wednesday evening in Munich, Germany play Hungary in the final group game in the European Championship. The City Council had hoped that during the match, the stadium would be lit up in rainbow colours as a gesture of tolerance in response to a recently approved Hungarian law banning educational materials deemed to promote homosexuality to children. But UEFA rejected the request and instead offered alternative dates in July when the venue illumination could take place.
Ich finde es beschämend, dass die UEFA...
That's Munich's Mayor Dieter Reiter calling UEFA's decision shameful, very disappointing, and he described their counter-proposal as laughable. But UEFA says its rules mean it has to be neutral on matters of politics and religion. Anna Hübner is a Munich city councillor.
UEFA is talking so much about the fight against racism, the fight against discrimination, and then they had the chance to live it and they said no because they're neutral, and I just can't understand it. I think they lack courage.
The law passed in Hungary bans what it calls the display and promotion of homosexuality among under-18s. The government's defended it as a way to protect children, but 13 EU countries have condemned the legislation. Balázs Hidvégi is a member of the European Parliament and was the spokesman for the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban until 2019.
What we don't want is the intrusion of so-called LGBTIQ lobby NGOs or pressure groups to walk into kindergartens and schools and explain to children why it's a great idea to have hormone treatments. These are not acceptable. Sports should remain sports. UEFA decision is a sober one.
On Wednesday evening, in a growing backlash against UEFA and protest against Hungary, German football clubs and council buildings across the country will light up in rainbow colours. But is this tournament becoming more politicised than usual, or is international football always this contentious? Martin Ziegler is chief sports reporter for the British newspaper The Times.
We certainly have seen sort of political tournaments before, the World Cup in Russia. I think football is always something which becomes a bit of a political vehicle. And this one, I think, is intensified because of COVID. But you know, we've got the next World Cup coming up in Qatar. Lots of human rights issues there. So yes, this is the beginning, not the end.
And that report was by Siobhan Leahy. Well, next we go to Libya, which has been racked by conflict since the end of Muammar Gaddafi's 40 years in power. The country is split between a UN-recognised government in Tripoli and rival authorities in the east, both backed by armed forces and foreign governments. There is currently a ceasefire, but chaos and instability have pushed almost 17,000 people to make the perilous journey across the Mediterranean to Europe this year alone. As part of efforts for lasting peace, Germany and the UN are hosting a conference which is bringing together the US Secretary of State as well as members of the Libyan transitional government and other foreign ministers. One of the main goals is to secure the removal of thousands of foreign mercenaries currently in Libya, as I heard from our correspondent in Berlin, Damien McGuinness.
I think you could say there are two main aims, really, of this UN-backed meeting in Berlin. The first, really, is to persuade the global powers who play a role in Libya right now to withdraw foreign fighters. So that's really aiming at Russia and Turkey, because at the moment, Libya is really split between two rival factions. On the one hand, you've got the east run by a rebel General Haftar, and then you've got the UN-recognised transitional government in Tripoli, which runs the other side of the country. Turkish troops support the Tripoli side, and Russian mercenaries, as well as forces from Egypt and the United Arab Emirates, support General Haftar in the east. So you have this split, and while you've got this split and while you've got these foreign fighters in Libya, it's very hard to have peaceful elections, and that's really the second aim, to lay the ground for peaceful elections in December. And that's a big commitment, and it's an ambitious commitment.
Yeah, now the two sides agreed a ceasefire back in October. How easy will it be to persuade them to remove those foreign troops?
Yeah, it's difficult. The ceasefire has so far been relatively successful. So to a large extent, the violence has stopped. So that has been a success since the first Libya conference in Berlin last year. The difficulty is that the regional players and the global players who have fighters in Libya want to keep influence in the region, really. That's the difficulty. What you're seeing right now is, even though there was a strong commitment last year to withdraw foreign fighters, there are still tens of thousands of them there. And that's because, on the one hand, Russia says that the Russian fighters there are mercenaries, so have nothing to do with Moscow. On the Turkish side, Turkey says that the troops that are deployed to help Tripoli and to support the Tripoli government were there before this agreement was signed. So Turkey argues that actually this is not relevant in the agreement they agreed last year. So what we're seeing is people are trying to wriggle out of these firm commitments made last year in order to keep influence in the region. And that's why pressure is really building in Berlin. Because while you have these foreign fighters, some of them state-backed and belonging to state forces, others, frankly, mercenaries, it's very hard to run elections, because to run elections you need to have one administration that controls the whole country, not two supported by foreign powers, as we're seeing right now.
Damien McGuinness in Berlin. The World Food Programme is warning that the worst drought in southern Madagascar for 4 decades is causing famine-like conditions. The WFP director, David Beasley, described living conditions as like something you'd see in a horror movie. The newsroom's Richard Hamilton is a former correspondent in Madagascar and joins us now. How bad is it in Madagascar?
It's really dire. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people are facing starvation. And because the staple crops such as maize and manioc and cassava have failed, people are resorting to eating cacti fruit and mud. And the director of the WFP, David Beasley, said 500,000 people were, in his words, knocking on famine's door, and another 800,000 people were walking towards it. He said he was shocked by the sight of children who he said just looked like skin and bones. And he called it a silent tragedy in a forgotten location.
It's 7 times worse than it was just a year ago. 7 times more children are in trouble. Why? Because of drought. We're facing the worst drought in over 40 years. And this is an area where people depend on their own agriculture. This is how they live down here. But with drought, back to back to back, people can't survive.
David Beasley of the World Food Programme. Well, Richard, you have been to this area. What's it like, and how has it come to this?
Yes, I was there in 2003 when there was another severe drought because the rains had failed for 3 consecutive rainy seasons. And I was struck by the soil was this very fine red dust everywhere. And then on the ground were cattle skulls. And then there was this sort of scrubland of spiky bushes. And in fact, the region's called the spiny forest or the spiny desert. And the local inhabitants are called the Antandroi, which means people of the thorns. And they're a very proud people, and their identity, if you like, is shaped by the hardship and the droughts that they've always faced. I mean, records show that there were droughts in the 1930s, and they resisted the French famously by setting up barricades of cactus fruit or cacti. And people say, oh, well, if it's so uninhabitable there, why don't they just move? But these people have lived there for hundreds of years, and their ancestors are buried there. And there's a saying there that a house is a voyage, but a tomb is for eternity. So they simply just don't want to move. And it's got worse because climate change has exacerbated it, as well as COVID. And so droughts are common, but they're getting more and more frequent. And tragically, it's really no fault of their own. They are suffering the worst from climate change. And this is very much a preview of what's to come. There's going to be more of these humanitarian disasters in the decades to come.
Richard, many thanks indeed. Richard Hamilton, former correspondent in Madagascar and of the newsroom. Well, now let's get a look at some of the day's other news with Neil.
Astronomers have discovered a huge asteroid entering our solar system that'll reach the orbit of Saturn in 2031. It's thought to be the largest body from the outer reaches of our solar system ever found to make such a close approach to the Sun. The Wall Street financial giant Morgan Stanley says its staff and clients will be barred from entering its New York offices if they're not fully vaccinated against COVID. An internal memo advised unvaccinated employees to work remotely. The policy comes into effect next month in a move aimed to allow the lifting of other COVID restrictions. And a zoo in Japan has announced the birth of twin giant panda cubs. The sex of the newborns has not been revealed, and it's not clear when visitors will be allowed to see them. Their arrival marks the second time that Mother Shinshin and Father Ri have bred at Tokyo's Ueno Zoo.
Neil, thank you. Now, it's been 30 years since the world first heard this sound. Well, that was the opening credits to Sonic the Hedgehog. The famous video game is celebrating a big birthday today, but Sega's Hedgehog is showing no sign of slowing down just yet. David Lewis has the details.
He's been racing across our computer screens, grabbing at gold rings and battling big bosses for 3 decades today. But Sonic the Hedgehog was forged not to battle baddies, but to fight a console giant. Back in the early 90s, when Nintendo's moustached plumber Super Mario dominated the gaming market, Sega wanted a piece of the action. They turned to Tom Kalinske, former head of toy company Mattel, for advice. Original sketches sent to him featured a ferocious-looking beast with very sharp spikes. The prototype Sonic also had a human girlfriend called Madonna. Tom and his team toned down the designs, leading us to the heroic hedgehog we all know today. Following its release on the 23rd of June 1991, Sonic's popularity soared. Alongside the reported 15 million computer game sales, there have been sequels, spin-offs, comic books and a cartoon series for television, and even a film for the big screen. So is he hanging up his racing boots? Not a chance. A new game is out in September, as is an animated series next year. There's a movie sequel planned, as well as a 3D show for a streaming service.
That report by video game fan David Lewis. Now we're getting some more on that breaking news from Spain, where 9 leaders of the Catalan Separatist movement who are serving long prison sentences have been released from Lledoners prison, which is around 45 miles, 70 kilometres northwest of Barcelona. They are now giving speeches. At least one of them is giving a speech outside. There are Catalan flags, a crowd chanting. This is part of the Prime Minister's efforts in the hope of achieving some reconciliation, but it's not a very popular move with some in Spain, but 7 of the 9 prisoners have been released. That's it from the newsroom.
This is the BBC World Service, bringing you powerful stories from a decade of conflict.
My name is Lina Sinjab, and I grew up in Syria. It's been 10 years since the start of the civil war, and I'm listening back to some of the extraordinary stories from the people who were there, including my own.
It's bizarre how the war makes you appreciate life more, appreciate every minute, appreciate every person in your life.
Basim, Muhammad, Mustafa, Yasser, we were all together again, and we started to play like we were born again. Born again. But it didn't last, because evil came. The evil of war.
But what has happened to the people in these stories? Join me as I discover where they are now.
Syria's Decade of Conflict, a special series of assignment. Listen to the whole series now at bbcworldservice.com/assignment.
Coming up on Podium, Shawnee Miller
Oh,
I
we love
cried
to hear
in
it.
that moment. But I also got Bolt's autograph when I was 13. I was 13. He came down to Nassau to compete, and I was just like, I have to get his autograph. And there was so many people, and I was just like squishing myself through everybody. And I didn't think I was gonna get his autograph, but when I went up to him and he signed it, I was just like, it melted my heart.
And of course, he definitely knows who you are now.
I would hope.
What's it like to go from an autograph seeker, hunter, to a peer, to a contemporary of his now?
That's a good question. I actually, after that moment of getting his autograph, the next time that I actually saw him like in person next to me was 2015. And that's when I got the silver in Beijing. And we were coming into the hotel the same time, and he like wrapped his arm around me. He's like, "Good job," and everything else. And I'm just like, I'm melting away. He just did a good job.
He recognizes he knows me.
I know, but yeah, no, that meant so much to me, and I remember like freezing for a second. I was just like, "Can I get a picture with you?" Got the autograph. I just need a picture now with you, and yeah, I mean, he's such a sweet person as well, and so motivating, and yeah, just to be able to be there with him and him acknowledging my accomplishments as well. It's an amazing feeling, and yeah, even now, it doesn't feel real. I know that I was in that position growing up and always wanted to get people autograph and always looked up to certain athletes. And now to be in this position where athletes look up to me as well, it doesn't feel real because I still feel as though I'm still that little kid, still growing up to try and accomplish my goals as well. And so, yeah, I'm always out here just trying to be my best version of myself and try to inspire the younger athletes as well to come up and just do their very best and, see where it takes them.
This is On the Podium with me, Eliza Skinner, Scout Bassett, and Ed Harry. Our guest is the defending 400 meters champion, Shawnee Miller-Weibo. I think we've got another photo, Ed.
Yeah, we like to look at someone's life away from the sport that they do. That look at something which they're perhaps their passions elsewhere, away from the arena. And yours is your wedding day. And I got to hold my hands up here if people aren't wearing sportswear. I'm terrible at this. I'm terrible at describing what people are wearing. So I'll just say, in this wonderful photograph, which will be great in any wedding album, it looks like it should be in a magazine photo shoot. You both look absolutely stunning. So you can tell us about the dress if you would like to, because I'm not capable of doing that.
It's a wedding dress, Ed.
Yeah, I know, but they're never just the wedding dress, are they?
Okay, yeah.
This was by far the best day of my life, the happiest day of my life, marrying my best friend. And yeah, we had our families there and our friends and just supporting us. And yeah, it was just a beautiful day overall. My look, I always wanted growing up a Cinderella. You know how girls have their dreams in mind of what they want to do when they get married. But I always had my goals of having a Cinderella dress. Going down the aisle, and it was such a beautiful dress. I was actually supposed to have two dresses, and I just didn't want to come out of this, and so it's just like, no, I'm just gonna stick with this one. And yeah, no, I just loved it, and it was such a beautiful day, and just to be able to spend the rest of my life with my husband, it's amazing.
I understand you're both athletes, and when you're away from the track, do you all talk about training and performance and racing, or when you're away from there, you're able to just leave that behind?
Oh, that's a good question. We actually do spend the entire day together, basically, because we train at the same time, and then we go straight from training home.
It's not too much together time? You don't get tired of each other?
No. Okay, let's say that we have a really good day of training. We'd come home and we'd be like, yeah, so I worked on this and I worked on that. I feel like what I could work on is this and what I could work on is that. And, things along that line. We're always like trying to help out each other and asking each other how training went and the things that we could improve on and the things that we worked on and things along that line. So, yeah, we're always talking track.
Are y'all competitive in other things, or just only when it comes to track and?
No, we're very competitive.
I figured, two athletes.
A few weeks ago, we went out do a little bit of mini golf, but I would always want to win. because I'm very competitive, but he also wants to win as well. And so at the beginning, it's all sweet and cute, and it's like, ah. And then towards the end, it's just like, you're cheating with your points. I'm winning. It gets like super competitive.
I love this, the idea of like two world-class athletes fighting tooth and nail over mini golf. Like, we're not moving on from this windmill until you admit you cheated.
And that's the thing too. If he wins, then he's like, and he knows like I'm feeling some sort. He's like, okay, let's play again. I'm like, no, I don't want to play again because now you're gonna tell me. Now you're gonna tell me that you're letting me win. No, thank you. Whenever we do compete against other couples or other family members, we're the perfect team.
I bet. Switching gears here, Shawnee, I wanted to ask you about something a little bit more serious. You are married to someone who is not of the same race, and I'm just curious if that has brought up, some challenges or perhaps even judgment, from college to today, since you two have been together.
Yeah, no, we've definitely gotten some feedback on it, negative feedback. From since we were even dating, where some people would be like, oh, well, he's a white guy. Why are you moving away from your race? Or, things along that line. And, we just don't really pay too much attention to it. For us, it's love is love. And, we go from there, and it's just all about finding who you love and who makes you happy. And, that's all that matters. But even just understanding each other, we've understood each other to different extents, even down to culture. We have different cultures as well, and so just getting a better understanding of who we are and our background and things along that line. And I know we have a great understanding with each other, and
That was really well said.
It's wonderful to celebrate a coming together of the Bahamas and Estonia, the Caribbean and Eastern Europe. I remember watching, and it's a few years ago now, an interviewer asking you both, I think he said to your husband, Michael, give me your best Bahamas accent or something like that. And he asked you, how many words do you know in Estonian? And I thought, that's not a very fair question. But I'm assuming now you know some more. Surely you know some more than a few years ago, right?
Unfortunate. The sad thing is I've forgotten a lot more since then. And so I know less now than I did then.
Oh,
But,
no.
Yeah, no, I still do want to learn. I always say that when I have kids, I'm probably just going to sit down and learn with them as he teaches them. But I definitely want to learn, because even when we go over to Estonia, a lot of his family still speaks Estonian, and I'm just sitting there like, what did they say?
Yeah. Translator.
Okay. And so no, I definitely want to be a part of the conversation. And so, I'm probably going to start back up again. Not today, but soon.
Yes. Maybe post-Olympics.
We hope you're winning gold again in Tokyo. And before you go, I just want to know, is there any mileage in doing what your other half does? He does a decathlon, so for women that would be a heptathlon. You were good at a lot of things when you were growing up. You told us all about all the different things that you did week on week. So any mileage in that? Does he try and persuade you? Come and do the multi-events.
He does. I'm jumping the gun with saying this, because Coach still has to finish discuss this. But next indoors, I'm going to be looking at doing the pentathlon, and maybe testing out a HEP. I don't really know about the HEP because I'm not very good at jav. So that would have to put in a whole lot of work. Also, maybe a 4 hurdles at some point, just one, and then that's it.
Wow.
Oh wow, we can't wait.
Lots of great insight.
You've got a lot of big plans in front of you, and we're so thankful that you took some time for us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys for having me.
Oh, she was great. So chill. Very chill vibe.
I like it when someone is a fierce competitor, but there's a switch, and when she's not that, she's Shawnee, and she's thinking about all the other stuff that she can think about. And I just think it's nice that people have different gears they can go through.
So, Scout, this dive that she did, sort of. I mean, she also sort of was like, I didn't really dive. I fell. But I feel like I feel like there was still that mindset that she had to have of staying completely focused on winning and all of your actions following that focus.
She didn't do anything that is against the rules. I can guarantee you that was not the first time she ever thought about something like that or needing to do something like that. Because you think about that in training and in races, like, oh, I might really have to take one here, to cross the line first. So that's something that I know some athletes even train doing.
I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned that your coach even talks about her finish.
Yeah, we talk about that race. Yeah, in fact, even before I told him we were gonna have her on this week, he actually pulled up the photo finish on his phone and showed me. And he was kind of, well, you're leaning too far back at the line, and it's a little bit tricky when you've got a prosthetic because it's easier for me to lean at the line if my lead foot is my anatomical leg. Whereas if I'm leaning at the line and the front leg is the prosthetic, it's almost not impossible, but it's really difficult to be forward leaning, right? Because the prosthetic, it's a fixed position for the most part. It's not like it bends the socket or anything like that. And so it's really difficult. And so we're constantly, positioning that lead foot so you can get a better lean. And so, he was kind of getting on me, and then he pulls up and whips out the photo finish. Like, if this is what you have to do in Tokyo, this is what I expect, the kind of effort.
But it goes to show how iconic this has been for winning and staying focused on the win.
Most of the time in a major final at 400 metres, the person in Shawnee Miller-Weibo's position would have lost that race. They would have been pipped on the line because different tactics. I'm going to leave it all out there and I may fade away to nothing in those last couple of metres. Whereas the other competitor, they're more even in their pacing and they're going to chase me down. And most of the time, Alison Felix or whoever it was chasing with that more even pace across the full one lap would have won. And the fact that it's this kind of it's thoroughly instinctive, isn't it? I think the lines there, I'm going to start to lean. Oh, I'm a bit early, but now my momentum, I will get across this line. I've seen very close finals in global finals where the person in her position lost the race. And the first thing, particularly ex-athletes sitting in the press tribune say is, why did so-and-so not lean? Why didn't they lean? Well, she did lean. I mean, she went way too early, but it just gave us this superhero. It is when you catch it in midair, but then she goes crash.
Well, that's it for me, Eliza Skinner, Scout Bassett, and Ed Harry. If you want to see the photos we've been talking about, head online and search for BBC Podium. And join us next time for more of this.
Still get excited till this day. I was the first black in Africa, in the world, to win a gold medal in the sport of rowing. So, yeah, still gives me goosebumps.
The story of Olympic gold medalists Sizwe and Luvu. That's next time on The Podium.
This is the BBC World Service, home of in-depth news and current affairs.
This is a moment in time for our common humanity.
Twice a day, every day. Interviews, news and analysis.
The situation here is getting worse and worse.
The day's events from around the world and sometimes above it.
A couple hundred miles below you, the Earth itself.
NewsHour, Monday to Friday at 13 and 20 GMT. And in 60 minutes, the newsroom with Oliver Conway.
An Ethiopian government airstrike on a market in Tigray is reported to have caused heavy casualties. We'll have the latest. As China tightens its grip on Hong Kong, a leading pro-democracy voice is silenced. We look ahead to the final Euro group matches and Sonic the Hedgehog at 30.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
It was in his early 20s that Armin Jabrailov first discovered Chechnya's underground gay scene.
For me, to see that much gay people was something
mind-blowing. And I just had no choice, just have one more drink and join them with the full heart.
But in 2017, increasing homophobia resulted in an unprecedented anti-gay crackdown in the Russian Republic. That saw Armin taken from work and held in a warehouse.
Since the moment they got me, each one of them wanted to hit me as much hard as they can. They crowded around me. They were expecting me as a next victim. I actually was expecting that I won't live long.
Armin was outed to his family, then released, and knew that his life in Chechnya was over. What he couldn't have guessed was where his next steps would take him. Join us for the story of Armin Jabrilov and Chechnya's so-called gay purge. That's coming up on Outlook after this.
Hello, I'm Neil Nunes with the BBC News. Hong Kong's leading pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily has confirmed that its last edition will be published on Thursday. The 26-year-old paper is highly popular in the Chinese territory and has been critical of the Communist Party leadership. It's been accused of violating the national security law imposed on Hong Kong by Beijing. Danny Vincent is in Hong Kong.
The pro-democracy newspaper had planned to publish its final edition later in the week, but the morning arrest of one of its lead writers sparked new fears that the paper would be raided once more by the police. The controversial tabloid has run for 26 years. Hong Kong has seen more than 100 national security law arrests since the law was introduced a year ago. 12 of those arrests are related to Apple Daily. Its owner, Jimmy Lai, was one of the first activists detained under the new law.
Ethiopian warplanes are reported to have bombed a market in the northern Tigray region, killing and wounding dozens of people. Catherine Bierehanga reports now from Addis Ababa.
Doctors at the main hospital in Tigray's capital, Mekelle, say they're treating dozens of people, including a 2-year-old child, injured by the airstrike on Tuesday. But medical personnel say they have been blocked from reaching the site of the attack to help others left behind. Eyewitnesses told the BBC that the Ethiopian Air Force struck a marketplace just 25 kilometers away from Mekelle. The military denies allegations it targeted civilians.
9 Catalan separatists have been released from jails in Spain after being conditionally pardoned by the government in Madrid. They were sentenced to long prison terms for sedition for their role in an unauthorized and ultimately unsuccessful bid for independence in 2017. One group of those freed unfurled a banner outside the jail saying, "Freedom for Catalonia." They remain banned from holding public office, and the government's pardon could be withdrawn if any of the 9 subsequently commit a serious offense. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the ceasefire agreement in Libya must be fully implemented and all foreign forces withdrawn from the country. Mr. Blinken was speaking in Berlin, where he's attending a second round of UN-sponsored Libyan peace talks. He's taking part alongside representatives from Russia, Turkey, France, and Egypt. Mr. Blinken said Germany and the U.S. believe they could work together to help Libya.
We have an opportunity that we have not had in recent years to really help Libya move forward as a safe, secure, sovereign country, and we're determined together to seize that opportunity.
World News from the BBC. President Putin has criticized what he said was NATO's refusal to engage constructively with Russia's proposals to de-escalate tension. Speaking at an international security conference in Moscow, he reiterated concerns about NATO expansion near Russia's borders. Meanwhile, Russia's embassy in Washington has called on the United States and its allies to stop planned naval exercises in the Black Sea. Uganda has closed parliament for 2 weeks due to a surge in coronavirus among MPs and other staff in the building. Uganda is facing a second coronavirus wave. There's been a surge in infections in other parts of East Africa. In Kenya's western city of Kisumu, 23% of those tested last week were positive. The European Commission is to challenge Hungary over recently passed legislation that would ban what Budapest calls the promotion of homosexuality and gender change to under-18s. The Commission's head, Ursula von der Leyen, said it would raise its legal concerns with Budapest. More from Danny Eberhard.
Ursula von der Leyen has called the Hungarian legislation shameful and a violation of fundamental EU values. Her comments follow a condemnation issued by 13 of the EU's 27 countries. Hungary says the legislation protects children, but it's facing a major backlash. That will be on show at tonight's crucial European Championship football match between Germany and Hungary in Munich. The city and many fans are expected to show LGBT rainbow colours in solidarity. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban has cancelled plans to attend.
Iranian state television says that a sabotage attempt on a building belonging to Iran's Atomic Energy Agency has been foiled. There have been a number of attacks on nuclear sites in Iran over the past year. Iran has accused Israel of being behind some of them. BBC News.
Hello, I'm Emily Webb. In July 2017, Ramzan Kadyrov, the leader of the Chechen Republic, sat down for an interview with an American journalist where he was asked this.
I wanted to ask you about the alleged roundup, abduction, and torture of gay men in the Republic. What, Mr. President, do you want to say about that?
Now, the reason this question was being put to him is because at the time allegations were circulating of a terrifying gay purge in the country, one where gay people were rounded up by security forces, tortured, and then their families were encouraged to kill them to protect their honor. This was his response. He says, "This is nonsense. We don't have such people here. We don't have any gays. To purify our blood, if there are any here, take them." On today's programme, a survivor of the purge speaks out about his ordeal, why he went into hiding, and why he became the first Chechen person to go public about what happened.
When Time magazine came out, just like realizing that I made this step, I passed this fear, and now everybody knows that gay in Chechnya exist.
This is Outlook sharing extraordinary personal stories. Chechnya is an autonomous region in the southwest of Russia. It has its own leader, its own currency, and unlike the rest of Russia, most Chechens are Muslim. Armen Jabrailov was born in the capital Grozny in 1992.
As waterfalls and lakes right in the middle of the mountains. And it's beautiful and it's green. It has warm summer and it has warm winter.
Armen grew up in the city with his parents, 4 brothers and twin sister. His dad was a taxi driver and his mum did any work she could to support the family, be that in a kitchen or a factory. It was a busy home, but on the rare occasions Armen had the house to himself, he'd put on some of his sister's clothes and switch on the TV.
I always knew that I'm different than my brothers. They didn't want to wear a skirt, but I wanted. And I would enjoy it. And I would enjoy dancing in that skirt, like listening to music from MTV channel, like Western pop music. And it's a booty shaking dance as a child. And I always knew that, I am something different and I would wear the skirt. And of course I knew that it wouldn't be allowed to me, so I would do it secretly. And I would hide if somebody appears.
You say that you realised that you needed to hide that. Why do you think you realised that? What made you think that?
You could feel the energy that it's not, something that they like, especially to my father. To be honest, I was kind of trying to hide my feminine side.
And even at that young age, that wasn't the only thing Armen was trying to keep under wraps. How old do you think you were when you realised that you might be gay?
Wow. I guess I was young to realize that thing. Because even before the war happens, actually I always, if you ask me now, do you like boys? Yes, I do. And I liked them even when I was a little child. I liked boys.
Those early days of dancing in front of the TV didn't last long. Chechnya is part of Russia, but after the Soviet Union fell apart, local leaders made a bid for independence. This was brutally repressed by Russia. An estimated 100,000 people were killed in the 20-month war starting in 1994. An uncertain peace lasted for a while, then in 1999 violence flared up again. Armin was 7.
I do remember how my parents gathered all of their 7 kids in a car, and my father drove us away to the village which he was born and got us out of city, which is in the days after was destroyed almost fully by bombing, and we were hiding for the first time. But because we were so close there, we could see the airplanes bombing and could hear actually what's going on, like earth shaking or earthquakes by war.
Now living in a refugee settlement in a village, it wasn't long before Armin witnessed the shocking reality of what happened to people who didn't fit in with traditional gender roles. One neighbour was a 20-something man who dressed in women's clothes.
I was a child, and it's the first year of our life in a village. And we were surrounded with a lot of people that lost their houses. And he also was a part of this. And I do remember that people would enjoy his company. He was funny, he would dress a woman, he would flirt with a man. And it was okay. And my mom and the woman that lived, they were always okay with him. And then would share meal with him, dinner or lunch, or offered to come into home. And I was standing next to my mom at the day when I heard that he was raped and killed by 2 men. And it was something that inside of me I could feel that, and I knew that something similar between us. And I just since that moment started looking after myself, the way I express, and transforming and training to be as much as I can, alike to a man.
What things did you do to modify your behaviour after you realised that?
Even just the way I walk, because I was recorded once on a video camera, and I just noticed that my walk looks so alike to a girl's. And everybody that in family watching that tape would laugh and make fun of me. Since that moment, I started looking after the way I walk and the way I see it, and even just my voice. Because my brothers always would say me that your voice is like when you are speaking like you are a girl.
In 2003, Armin's family were able to move back to Grozny and tried to rebuild their lives in the bombed-out city. It wasn't easy. Armin's father was ill and would soon pass away, and his mother ended up working as a labourer. After school, Armin joined her on construction sites. That was until he found his real passion. So tell me, who was the first person whose hair you did? How did it start?
Oh, I did a hair of my youngest sister. She was 8 years younger than me, and she was my baby that I would look after since she was born. And she also was the first client that brought me a client that would actually pay me. On a Happy New Year evening, I just learned from a magazine how to pull up a hair the beautiful way. And she went there, she was beautiful, and everybody liked her hair. And her teacher came to me and asked me, who did the hairstyle on her head? And I just me did. And how? And you are a boy, and I never have seen a boy, a hairdresser in church. Wow. So I'm getting married in a week, and could you do my hair? And I was so happy to earn my first money, not from a construction, And I understood that I loved this job. It was something fulfilling me, I had passion about it.
And you then started working in hairdressing salons. That reaction that she had when she said, it's very unusual to be a male hairdresser in Chechnya, did a lot of other people react like that?
Absolutely did. And since that moment, I started building a clientele, and it would be the girls that getting married. And also it was, kind of shocking. She's a young girl getting married. A man cannot touch her before she get married.
Perhaps a testament to Armin's skills that in a conservative Muslim society, he was the one man allowed near the bride on her wedding day. And as his hairdressing career was starting, Armin was introduced to a new side of the city he called home. you discovered that there was also this whole underground gay scene in Chechnya. How did you first come across that?
Wow, I will tell you. I was at my first work, and before that I only have met a couple of gay men. And I was at work, and then one of the boys I have met recently offered me to come some restaurant, like chilling with the friends. And you know, I was always scared to be recognized in a company of gays. But I joined them, and it was actually the evening of Happy New Year of 2012, I guess. After some time, we're sitting together in that restaurant, about 20 people gathered together. And it's for me to see that much gay people was something mind-blowing. Actually, when the first years passed, I was feeling such a thing that I wanted to feel always. I wanted to be surrounded with this energy of acceptance and celebrating. You know, they would dance. And it just like blew my mind, and I just like had no choice. Just have one more drink and join them with the full heart. And it happens. I spent with them a whole New Year evening, and my life changed forever from that moment.
But that discovery came with an element of fear. Homophobia is widespread in Chechen society, and as you've already heard, Ramzan Kadyrov, the head of the republic, has denied that there are any gay people in Chechnya's population of 1.4 million. Against this backdrop, the fear of harassment was always present for Armin.
Always was a fear of somebody entering into your party. It would be like, you know, when it's noisy, try to not make that much noise so we won't have troubles. You were hearing that kind of stories that somebody was like tracked or realized that they're having a gay party. And it would end actually with some troubles. It could be, you know, somebody that jumped from a balcony trying to run away and broke their bones. That you can be blackmailed and they can ask money for not giving up to your family that you are gay. But you had kind of no choice, like to live and continue your life and to hope that you are not going to be the next one.
But by 2017, the situation had escalated. That was the year an unprecedented anti-gay crackdown started in Chechnya. Armin had heard rumours of gay men being rounded up, nothing concrete. Then they came for him.
Well, I was at work, and it's about lunchtime when me and my client came back to my room, and I was closing my door of my room, and I just noticed it, 3 men walking into the salon, and they brought this energy of something harmful. And my intuition started telling me, run through the window. And I didn't. And I just opened the door, and then when I heard they were asking my name, and I just walked them and told my name. And immediately after I told my name, they started putting my hands behind my back, and I'm just like, wow, this is happening and this is real. And I couldn't breathe. I was just in a shock, and they were so rude and so mean. They took my passport and my phone, and they just started like carrying me out. And all of my colleagues, all of them were girls, and they're looking at me with this fear, and they just ordered me lay in the trunk of the car. And at the moment also I couldn't believe I'm gonna lay in the trunk of the car, which is in my mind something, when it happens, people don't come back. And I laid in the trunk, and the car moved, and it was a long drive. And they started asking me with a question, oh, do you like men? I know that you like men. Do you like play with the boys? And I just realized that it's the reason why I'm kidnapped.
Armin believes the people who took him worked with the Chechen security services. His experience tallies with dozens of other men who have spoken anonymously about the roundup. The government has always denied these allegations, accusing human rights groups of fabricating stories. After he was detained, Armin was taken to a large warehouse outside the city, and a warning, you're going to hear a graphic description of torture.
Since the moment they got me out of trunk, they immediately, each one of them wanted to hit me. as much hard as they can. They crowded around me because they were expecting me as a next victim. And it was crazy what was going on in my mind. I actually was expecting that I won't live long.
And what they were actually doing is that they were rounding up gay people and they were getting names of other gay people out of them. What did they do to try to get those names?
Well, first of all, they got into that room, the person that gave up my name, and we had an eye contact. And there's something switched inside of me as well, that I don't want to be the one that gave up name and be on his place, and I don't want to see nobody else on my place. And they started torturing me. They took some plastic pipes out of somewhere and started beating on my legs and my shoulders and my hands. I'm feeling such a pain in my body. And eternal time went on. And I'm just still avoiding the answer of a name, and they just put out a black box, which is names like detector of lie, and it's a kind of joke. And it actually was electrocuted machine. And just, connected these wires to my fingers. And I was in such a shock when they started rolling this, and it went through my body like as a fire. They tried to, with this machine for a long time to get out of name, and I'm just keeping silent. And I do understand why I didn't want to give up name. I knew that somebody else's life will be completely destroyed like was mine. I already knew that I don't have life to go back.
Armin's refusal to give up the names of other gay men infuriated his tormentors. Things then escalated.
The head of them, the commander, he charged his gun, and I could hear it. And when I felt his gun right on my forehead, it's like I was frozen. Something for sure stepped out of my body. And he said to me, "This is your last second." And I'm standing bare feet on the floor, and then just hearing these words. And he didn't kill me actually, but some part of me for sure died there.
It sounds unimaginable and absolutely terrifying as well. And I wonder, when you were going through all of that, did it also feel surreal that you'd been in work and these people had taken you away and now they were threatening to kill you, and it was just all happening in your home, the place where you lived?
I was so upset. I was so angry. I was so shocked by seeing that the people are torturing me actually are Chechens. It's not somebody else from outside. And I'm just screaming out them that I'm also Chechen, and I'm just like you, and I'm just taking care of huge family. Stop beating me, please don't kill me. And I just screamed, I am a good person. Just listen to me. You won't beat me if you know who I am. I am a mother's good son. And I'm understanding that doesn't matter for them because of I am a gay word, for them. Just only gay. And, sometimes if you ask me what was the hardest thing, it was a physical pain or emotional pain. Maybe more trauma was because of the words they would use to describe you, how disgusting you are. And it's just you sitting, believing them that the God hates you the way they say it. But I knew that God doesn't hate me. And I was still believing and begging him to save me and give me, strength to handle this every time.
When at the end of the 2 weeks, they told you that your family would be coming to get you, what was your reaction?
Actually, the day came to release us. It was also a nightmare. Because they called our family members, male representatives, my 3 brothers. And the heads giving orders were sitting on a stage, and we gay guys as victims were standing next to the right wall, and you just hearing that they asking your family members to take off the shame from Chechnya, which was mean to kill you or to lock you down forever.
Because a lot of the people there, their families had no idea that they were gay, and so It's alleged that when the authorities released the people, that they would say, get rid of the shame, and would encourage families to kill their children, to kill their siblings. What was your brother's reaction?
I wasn't thinking that my brother's gonna kill me, because family is something in Chechnya the most precious and important. But you know what? It was almost your life was ended, because you won't come back to that life, to that respect you had. And when I sit in a car with my brothers and my mom, she was also waiting there outside. It was silence, actually. And I don't know what was happening inside of them, but I was feeling shame and guilt for all of the things that happens to family. We didn't know what to speak about. They actually were glad to get me back alive, even if my body was purple and blue. And I just wanted to run away, because what I felt next to my brothers, it was absolutely different.
How long did it take you before you did actually run, before you left Chechnya?
Well, I was released at, it was 17 March. I was kidnapped at 3rd March, and 17 March, after 2 weeks, I was released. And I spent 5 days, saying goodbye to all the people I loved and gathering some stuff and ending some business. And it was symbolically my birthday when I flew away to Moscow on 22nd March.
Amin had a one-way ticket. With his very public outing, he knew he'd probably never return to Chechnya.
When I got on the airplane, there started my panic of understanding that I am leaving this land that I was born and grew up in. And I started shaking. And then the boy next sitting to me, and he just gave me his headphones and then his phone, and just listen to music, just calm down and don't be worried. And he didn't know why am I just sitting on that plane, but it was actually, something nice to feel from somebody else, that kind of support, that he cared. And when I got to Moscow, I cried with my friend at the airport.
Because you were staying with your friend initially in Moscow, and obviously you weren't in a great state at all, physically or mentally. But I want you to tell me about this pivotal moment, which is when you went out on your first night at a gay bar in Moscow. What was it like?
Well, I will tell you this. When I got to Moscow and we were celebrating actually my birthday, my freedom, I was just so kind of happy and glad that my worst nightmare that would happen in Chechnya was behind. And of course I was, ready to fully enter into the gay life I was always afraid to leave. I always liked to go dancing, but there was no place in Chechnya, and it was about midnight. I'm like, I want to continue. I'm survived, and this is my life, and I want to celebrate my freedom. Wow, and we got to the club, and I went straight into the crowd, right in the middle, in front of DJ. And it was about first time me dancing and not feeling anything about being gay or somebody that gonna see me in this club, and then just, he's gay. And my mom knows, my brothers knows, whole Chechnya knows. And all of those bad people knows. Everybody knows, and I don't need to hide it. And it was amazing.
We're back with Amin Jabrailov in a moment as he decides to flee Russia and tell the world about what happened. This is Outlook.
Now on the BBC World Service, today's BBC Minute update on the coronavirus.
Hello, it's William and James.
India has classified a new variant of the virus, first spotted in Europe, as a variant of concern.
Delta Plus is said to be easier to spread, but other health experts say it's still too early to tell.
It's linked to the existing Delta variant.
As for cases, the tally in India has now topped 30 million.
Taiwan is extending restrictions to the 12th of July, following a surge in its own numbers.
Meanwhile, Zimbabwe is pushing back back the reopening of its schools by 2 weeks. Pupils were due to go back on Monday.
Next, a drug that's normally used to treat parasitic worms is being tested as a new treatment for COVID at home. Scientists in the UK will be giving ivermectin to over 50s who are showing symptoms.
And organisers of the Tokyo Olympics have released tough new rules designed to reduce the virus risk for ticket holders.
Drinking alcohol at the games will be banned, as will loud cheering, hugs, and high fives.
BBC Minute.
Next on Outlook, Armin Jabrailov on why he became the first Chechen to go public about his experience of the Russian Republic's anti-gay crackdown.
And I'm just was actually so proud of myself that I decided to do that, even in such a condition of fears. And I'm just it is happened. And now everybody knows that gay in Chechnya exist.
We're continuing his story after the news.
BBC News with Neil Nunes. Hong Kong's leading pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily has confirmed that its last edition will be published on Thursday. The closure comes after police raided its offices last week and seized over $2 million worth of assets. Its owner and other executives have also been arrested. In another development, the first person charged under Hong Kong's national security law, Tong Ying Kit, has pleaded not guilty at his trial in front of 3 judges. Ethiopian warplanes are reported to have bombed a market in the northern Tigray region, killing and wounding dozens of people. Eyewitnesses said they saw bodies strewn across the ground in Togoga town, 25 kilometers from the regional capital Mekelle. Doctors say they are treating dozens of the injured at Mekele's main hospital. 9 Catalan separatists have been released from jails in Spain after being conditionally pardoned by the country's government. They were sentenced to long prison terms for sedition for their role in an unauthorized and ultimately unsuccessful bid for independence in 2017. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said that the ceasefire agreement in Libya must be fully implemented and all foreign forces withdrawn from the country. Mr. Blinken was speaking in Berlin, where he's attending a second round of UN-sponsored Libyan peace talks. Uganda has closed Parliament for 2 weeks due to a surge in coronavirus among MPs and other staff in the building. Last week, officials said more than 100 people in Parliament had tested positive. The latest survey of business activity in the Eurozone economies shows the fastest rate of acceleration for 15 years. The closely watched IHS Markets Purchases Managers Index indicates that the easing of lockdown measures and the release of pent-up demand has driven a boom. BBC News.
Hello, you're with Outlook. I'm Emily Webb. If you've just joined us, today we're hearing from a survivor of Chechnya's gay purge. In 2017, Armin Jabrailov says he was rounded up by members of Chechnya's security services, taken to a warehouse and tortured. It was part of a wider crackdown on gay people living in the Russian Republic. After the attack, Armin realized he needed to leave his home, his family, and start a new life. He arrived in Moscow but was still worried he might be pursued. Then he read a newspaper article about a network helping persecuted Chechens escape harassment.
From their page, I read that there's an LGBT network organization gonna help with a shelter and even to leave a country. And that's something I was looking for, because I felt this paranoia that something happened again. That was my fear. I would stand a whole day in the room of my friend, waiting for her to come back from work. And actually, I was still carrying all of this trauma inside of me and feeling that everybody is kind of seeing that I'm gay.
So you ended up contacting this network of people who were helping gay people who were fleeing Chechnya. They agreed to house you in one of their safe houses. What was it like inside that safe house?
You are sitting somewhere from day to night, just waiting and hiding. You just step on some pathway to escape in this country, and you're just waiting for somebody to respond. I would feel stress from the morning to the night, and you were surrounded with so many different people, and sometimes you wanted to give up and thinking about going back, and you just would stop believing.
Armin's salvation came from a Canadian organisation called Rainbow Railroad. Their director, Kimali Powell, flew to Russia to meet residents of the safe house and help them apply for asylum in other countries.
I was the last person he interviewed, and it was about midnight, actually. And he was patiently listening to me, to my story, and I was crying, and all of the people around me crying, because I was telling them the truth, what was happening to me. And he's in shock. He's like, I'm gonna do what is in my power to make it faster, to move you out, to make it happen as much quickly as it possible, because the condition I was in, it's just if you're gonna take me out of this country today, I'm ready.
And eventually, Armin got permission to leave. After 3 months in the safe house, he was granted asylum in Canada and headed to Moscow airport for his flight out of the country. It was July 2017. But as he was going through immigration, he says there was one last hurdle to face.
It was actually the last awful moment. When I walked, the questioning, that woman was so suspicious, and maybe she was able to read on my face that I'm escaping. They put us aside, me and 2 boys that was flying away with me, in some office that would be questioning where we are from and why we're flying into Canada. And it's about almost time of our flight, but they held us. And I was trying to avoid all of the panic showing on my face, which is actually happening inside me, because I was actually scared that they won't allow me to leave a country. But we were not speaking it up. We were just, he professional, I am the client of this airport, the person that has his flight. And when they have done all of the questions, and just about 20 minutes before our flight, one of them came out to tell us that we can go, but at the same time just made a joke. Yeah, I know that in Canada you can have gay marriage. And I'm like, well, I knew that you were keeping me on hours in that office just because you just realized that I'm gay.
You've described arriving in Canada as arriving home. What do you mean by that?
I was coming into this country known as a gay. And as Kimali told me, gay here can have free life and can enjoy their lives. It's about belonging. And the plane is landed. For me, it was clear that my dream home gonna be here, my dream life gonna be here, and it was never meant to be in Chechnya.
So you arrived in Canada in 2017, you settled in. 2019, you went to Pride in New York. What was it like to be part of such a big celebration?
Wow, it's kind of, as a person from Chechnya, for the first time understanding what is the celebration of Pride means. It was for me something that I accepted the way I am, who I am. And I just was on the top of the speaker that was playing the music. And again, I was shaking my booty and I was having fun. And I just seeing all of these people walking. It's the first time was understanding, fully understanding what does that mean when you just, broke all of the barriers or the things you have learned about yourself, and you just clearly were sure that God doesn't hate you. It's people that hate you.
Armin's experience of Pride led him to make an extraordinary decision. No Chechen had spoken out publicly about their experience of the gay crackdown, in part because although the Russian LGBT network claimed they've helped over 200 victims escape Chechnya, there have been reports of people being detained in Russia and forcibly sent back. Armin decided, now that he felt safe in his new home country, he wanted to become the first Chechen to go public about his detention and torture. He was featured in Time magazine and gave a primetime TV interview to 60 Minutes.
When Time magazine came out, I opened the link in my email. My friend sent me it. And through my whole body went something like an army of ants. And it's just realizing that I made this step. I passed this fear. And it's empowering and it's unexplainable. And I'm just was actually so proud of myself that I decided to do that. Even in such a condition of fears I was holding in my mind. And I'm just it is happened. And now everybody knows that gay in Chechnya exist.
What was the reaction to you speaking out?
I would hear from people cheering me for my bravery to come out all of this trauma I had. You know, I wanted to help others like me, and that's one of the main reasons I opened myself to tell to people that it's real and it's happening, and I survived it. I wanted to say that I'm grateful to all of these people in Canada for not just building this kind of world that accepts me and for saving me, but also for all of those who came with me and had no chance or maybe were not ready to do it.
Armin's now been living in Canada for 4 years and has never been back to Chechnya. Abuses against LGBTQI people have continued since Armin left. 2019 saw another alleged roundup of gay Chechens, which was once again denied by the government. Today, activists say little has improved in the Republic. Now that you have the freedom to live as you want to, what do you want to do with your future?
I want to inspire people. I was a successful hairdresser, and when I came here, I realized that I can be a hairdresser. But before that, I just realized it's a perfect time for me to speak out and to be some kind of an example of self-acceptance or bravery. And to let those children like I was that had no knowledge about who I am, and just let them know that the people like you and like me exist, and we deserve a better life.
Armin Jabrailov speaking to me from his new home in Canada, and the clip you heard at the start of his interview came from HBO. Any comments you can email us on outlook@bbc.com. For decades, there was a rule in the US that banned girls from playing league games in one of the country's most popular sports, baseball. That was until one 12-year-old came along who wouldn't take no for an answer. Back in 2018, Colm Flynn went to meet Maria Pepe, who fought to get the rules changed in the 1970s.
This game is the Churchill Boys, which actually won the championship last year. I know the coach, and the other team they're playing is the Marios.
That's Maria Pepe. Together we're watching the game.
Keep your eye on it now. Watch it hit your bat, kid.
And as we look out across the field, she's thinking back to her childhood.
My family moved to a new apartment complex in Hoboken when I was 5. And there were a lot of boys in this new neighborhood. And what they were doing was playing ball. I became passionate. Actually, I became very good at it. I did love baseball, and a lot of the boys would want me on their teams.
And as a little girl, you had a dream to play for the Yankees, was it?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would have definitely said I want to be a Yankee.
Maria had been playing baseball on the streets with her friends for years, but then she heard about a new team that was holding tryouts for the local Little League tournament. In the United States, the Little League is an organization which runs baseball leagues for children across the country. It was 1972, and a 12-year-old Maria was excited to try out. She arrived at the gate of the baseball fields just next to where we're sitting now.
My friends walked up to the club, and they all went in and signed their name, and I stood at the door. But my coach came out. His name was Jimmy Farina, and he said, "What are you doing there? Why aren't you inside signing up?" I think maybe he thought I was a boy, but I looked at him, and I said, "Well, you think you let me take a chance and try out?" I said, "My name's Maria." And he said, "Can you play?" And he looked at me, and I'm like, "Yeah, well, there's no question I could play." I was really excited. He liked my pitching, and he said, "You're on the team."
Maria was thrilled, and when the league started, she was out there with the boys doing what she loved. But what she didn't realize at the time was her simple desire to play the game would end up causing national controversy.
So it was the first game of that new season, and I was the starting pitcher. And a couple of coaches said, "Jimmy, why do you have a girl on your team? The girls are not allowed." And nobody really made any comments about my ability to play. It was just the fact that I was a girl. It was kind of drawing a little attention. It did bother me emotionally, but I would never cry or anything like that if I felt bad about what was being said on the sidelines, or, kind of get a sense that maybe they were going to ask me to leave or whatever.
Word got to the Little League headquarters in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, that a girl was playing in their tournament in Hoboken, and they weren't happy. They threatened to revoke the town's charter and end the season for over 100 boys if she continued to play. Their rules were explicitly spelled out in the regulations. Girls are not eligible under any circumstances. So, after just 3 games, Maria was made to turn in her uniform and ended her Little League career.
And my coach offered for me, I could come up to watch the games and keep score so I could be as closest to my friends as I could be. I did it for 1 game, and being out of the uniform and just keeping score was so extremely frustrating that I just knew I couldn't do that anymore.
A local newspaper ran the story with the headline, "Maria Pepe kicked off team." This caught the attention of the National Organization for Women. They offered to take a gender discrimination case against the Little League on Maria's behalf, and the story became national news.
People would ask me, well, why do you want to play baseball? Why do you want to play baseball? Well, why does this guy want to play baseball? Why does this guy want to play? Why don't you ask them why they want to play? Like, I always had trouble answering the question. Like, it's because I enjoy it. I realized, like, at some point that this wasn't about my ability to play. It was the fact that people were trying to adjust. Should we let girls be athletic? Does that mean that they're non-feminine?
This case went on for 2 years, and almost every day Maria would rush home from school and ask her mother if a decision had been made yet. She would then sit and go through all the newspaper articles about the case.
I saw like some of the articles were about doctors testifying about girls' bones compared to boys. There were psychologists testifying. I mean, they were arguing, well, what if a girl gets hurt and you got to take her pants off on the field? There's no facility. And none of this stuff seemed to matter to me. I just kept saying, Mom, maybe the judge will ask me to come and show that I could play. Like, that's really all that mattered to me.
It was years of stress for young Maria, and in 1974, a final decision was made. The hearings officer in the New Jersey Division for Civil Rights for this case was Sylvia Pressler.
Her reading was that Little League is as American as the hot dog and apple pie. And there's no reason why that part of Americana should be withheld from girls.
It was official. The New Jersey Superior Court ruled that Little League must allow girls to try out and, if successful, play. There was cause for celebration, but for Maria it was tinged with sadness, as almost 30,000 girls signed up for the new softball program across the country. Maria was not one of them. By this time, she was 14 years of age, and too old for the league, which then only enrolled 8 to 12-year-olds.
But my father was the one that kind of put it in perspective, and he said, well, you really have to think of all the girls now that can come after you.
And did you ever get an apology, Maria?
Well, I would say like this story evolved when it was going to be the 30th anniversary of the ruling.
In 2003, Maria received a phone call from Little League. They asked her if she would throw the ceremonial first pitch of the 2004 Little League Baseball World Series in Williamsport.
When I was invited to the 30th anniversary, there was this president of Little League, Dr. Creighton Hale, whose name was always in the newspapers as the one fighting against me. And they asked if I would be willing to go up and shake his hand. And I thought, I've been waiting for this moment forever. And it was an older man, very gentle. And I shook his hand, and he said, how are you? I said, good. And he said, I want you to know my granddaughter plays. But I think it was his way of saying he had come full circle. And it was like a healing moment.
Maria and I stand beside the batting cages, where the youngest kids practice their batting. On the side of the building is Maria's name, as 2 years ago they dedicated the cages to her.
I mean, I can cry now because there was so much hurt that it was another healing moment. It was a tough experience as a child, but sometimes that's the only way you grow in life, is having these struggles. And today, you know, I walk around and see girls and they got the double backpack with the bat sticking out and the softballs and the soccer balls, and I'm like thrilled to death. I can't even express as a human being what that feels like. Like, I feel like I get to play forever. For all the girls that play today, it's like you get to really play forever.
Maria Pepe speaking to Colm Flynn in 2018. And although her baseball career was just 3 days long, Maria's hat now sits in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Well, that's all for today. I'm Emily Webb, and you've been listening to Outlook. Goodbye.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, and now witness history with me, Louise Hidalgo. Today, as part of our programming for LGBTQ Pride Month, we're going back to 1983 and the discovery of the diaries of Anne Lister, a 19th century Englishwoman who's been called the first modern lesbian. A landowner and a businesswoman, Anne Lister recorded her affairs with women in a secret code at a time when the word lesbian hadn't even been coined. In 2019, I spoke to historian Helena Whitbread, who spent 5 years decoding Anne Lister's diaries to tell her story for the first time.
Behind her back, she gentleman Jack, a Yorkshire lady of renown, never so fine, won't toe the line.
I think Anne Lister's journals must have been the best kept secret in Halifax for going on 200 years.
Anne Lister was born in Halifax in Yorkshire, Northern England in 1791. Fiercely independent, she defied the conventions of her time and adored women, falling passionately in love time and again.
If you are seduced by Anne Lister, either in bed or on paper, you remain seduced.
And were you seduced?
I was seduced by the romance and the originality, and not least the fact that she lived in my hometown. You know, when you come from a small town anywhere, as a young person, you think, God, it's dull here. But once I got the Anne Lister journals and started working through them, the town changed for me. It became a very romantic place to be.
It was in the archives of the Central Library in Halifax that Helena Whitbread first came across Anne Lister's diaries.
There was a young man there, a young Scottish man, and he was on loan to the archivists, and he said, did you know she kept a journal? But of course, when he put the journal up on the reader printer for me, a few pages, I saw that there was this esoteric code. Then, of course, I began to think, why is this woman writing in code 200 years ago?
The reason, Helena Whitbread later realised, was that Anne Lister was writing in often very explicit detail about her steamy love affairs with women at a time when English society didn't recognise lesbian relationships. And because it was in code, Anne could write with an openness and confidence about her own sexuality and her views on life, men, society, that revealed a very different woman to the women of classic English novels of the time by the likes of Jane Austen and the Brontes.
She really thought that no one would ever be able to crack the code, and she thought she was quite safe in putting down what she wanted to put down, which was a lot about her sexual life, of course.
And what was the code? What was it like?
Greek letters, numbers, symbols that she made up herself. And there was absolutely no full stops, no capital letters, nothing to say where one sentence started and another sentence finished.
29th of January, 1821. Burnt Mr. Montague's farewell verses that no trace of any man's admiration may remain. It is not meet for me. I love and only love the fairer sex, and thus be loved by them in turn. My heart revolts from any other love than theirs.
And, of course, homosexuality between men was illegal in 19th century Britain. But there wasn't really any acknowledgement, was there, of sexual relations between women? People talked about romantic friendships, but did they sort of know?
Well, there was no language for it, really, was there, in those days? But there was a lot of gossip around the tea tables, so I think the older people were wise. And Mr. Lally once said, I would as soon have a man run round loose among my women at home as Anne Lister.
And did she know that there was this talk about her?
People told her what was being said about her, and she reported them in her crypt hand.
Did it upset her?
No, she wasn't. She'd say, I'll walk with whom I like. I'll walk with a chimney sweep if I want.
Musing on the subject of being my own master, of going to Buxton in my own carriage with a man and a maidservant, meeting with an elegant girl of family and fortune, paying her attention, taking her to see Castleton, staying all night, having a double bedroom, gaining her affections, etc.
She certainly goes on at great length. It's almost clinical at times. As she said, I've never forced myself on any woman, and I've never been refused by any. They all went back for more, shall I say.
Behind her back, she's Gentleman Jack, she's Gentleman Jack.
Anne Lister was the second of 6 children of a British officer who'd fought in the American War of Independence. The Listers were an important Halifax family, and when her brothers died, it was Anne who inherited the 400-acre estate. Educated, confident, a great traveller and a scholar, Anne used the independence her inheritance gave her to live her life as she pleased. Locals nicknamed her Gentleman Jack.
Gentleman Jack, oh Gentleman Jack, watch your back.
August 1823. I know my own heart, and I know men. I am not made like any other I have seen. I dare believe myself to be different from any others who exist. Writing my journal has amused and done me good. I seem to have opened my heart to an old friend. I can tell my journal what I can tell none else.
One of Anne's descendants, the last Lister at the Lister family home, Shibden Hall, did manage to crack the code in the 1930s with the help of a friend called Arthur Burrell. But the two were so outraged by what they read that they hid the diaries, they hoped forever. On his death, however, the diaries were discovered and were given to Halifax's chief librarian for safekeeping.
And he said to Arthur Burrell, I need a key for this. And Arthur Burrell at first said, I'm not giving it you because it's so shocking. Anyway, he relented and he said, I will give you one copy. He says, and then I will burn my copy. So it was still a big secret in the town, known only to a few higher-ups, till I came along.
You'd gone to university later in life, hadn't you, as a mature student, and you trained as a teacher. But what you really wanted to do was write, wasn't it?
Yes, and I thought I would start with small articles about the local people. And I think I must have picked it up from reading bits in the local newspaper about her. I thought I'll make that my start. That was optimistic of me. It hasn't finished yet, 35 years later.
All you knew at first, of course, was that she'd been a local figure. You didn't know anything about her private life. And it was this young archivist, as you said, who told you about the diaries and who gave you the key to the code. And you photocopied 50 pages. You took them home and you started trying to decode them. How difficult was it?
I had to do it symbol by letter, symbol by letter. But of course I had my week's work to do at school, and it took me 5 years to decode the whole of the cryptic passages.
Because she'd written so much, hadn't she? Was it more than 4 million words, 27 volumes? Not all in code, of course, but how long did it take you as well to realise that she was a lesbian?
It took me a little while, actually. And one of the first clues I got was she put something like, I think I need to go to Russia and find myself a wife. And I began to think, oh, yes. And then it gradually became clear that she was having a love affair with Mariana Lawton.
Mariana Lawton was the great love of Anne's life, wasn't she?
Yes. You know, the first, shall I say, concrete instance came when she visited Mariana in York. And Mariana said, why don't you lock the door and we can have a kiss? I'd realised by then that kiss was a euphemism for sexual activity. And Anne said, I took off my drawers, lifted my skirts up, jumped into bed, and we had a wonderful kiss. And so from then on, I really knew that this was what was going on.
And Helen, all that time you were working, deciphering Anne's secrets. You didn't really tell anybody, did you, what you'd found?
No, I didn't actually. Just my family, of course. It was like I was sharing her secret before the world crowded in.
Helena Whitbread published a first volume of Anne Lister's diaries in 1988, followed by 2 other volumes. UNESCO's since recognised the diaries as a unique historical resource. Anne Lister died in 1840 in the Caucasus of an insect sting. I'm Louise Hidalgo. That's it from this edition of Witness History.
This is the BBC World Service, and on this week's assignment...
Amini Jones in Nigeria, where a wave of mass kidnappings has gripped schools in the north. Gunmen have abducted over 1,000 students and staff and killed 9 of them. But what do the hostage takers want? and how can they be stopped?
Journeys to the heart of a story. Assignment, Thursday at 8 and 19 GMT. And in 30 minutes, Digital Planet with Gareth Mitchell.
From healthcare to crime, recruitment to housing, machine learning is increasingly making decisions that affect your life. So, we're asking serious questions about the data that powers the algorithms.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
BBC World Service, it's midday GMT. This is Oliver Conway with the newsroom. As communist China tightens its grip on Hong Kong, the Apple Daily pro-democracy newspaper confirms it will shut from tonight.
It's a terrible, tyrannous move by the Beijing regime and by the government in Hong Kong, which simply does what it's told.
Also on the newsroom, 9 Catalan separatist leaders are freed from Spanish prisons.
What we want is amnesty. Today is a day of joy, especially for those who've left prison today and our families. But the joy is not full.
UEFA posts a picture of its logo in rainbow colours, but says it won't back down in the row with the authorities in Munich. And later. Sonic the Hedgehog at 30, but the famous video game character is showing no sign of slowing down. First, our top stories.
Hello, I'm Neil Nunes with the BBC News. Hong Kong's leading pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily has confirmed that its last edition will be published on Thursday. The 26-year-old paper is highly popular in the Chinese territory and has been critical of the Communist Party leadership. The closure comes after police raided its offices last week. Britain, the territory's former colonial ruler, said the closure was a chilling blow to freedom of expression in Hong Kong. Our Asia-Pacific editor Celia Hatton has this report.
Apple Daily has long been seen as Hong Kong's main opposition newspaper. Owned by the outspoken billionaire Jimmy Lai, the paper was the go-to source of information during the territory's frenetic pro-democracy protests in 2015 and 2019. Now, Mr. Lai is in prison, and the paper's assets have been frozen, paralysing its operations. Police in Hong Kong have meanwhile arrested a senior Apple Daily columnist, Li Ping, accusing him of colluding with foreign forces. 2 of the paper's executives have already been charged with the same crime.
Ethiopian warplanes are reported to have bombed a market in the northern Tigray region, killing and wounding dozens of people. Catherine Bierahanga reports from Addis Ababa.
Doctors at the main hospital in Tigray's capital, Mekelle, say they're treating dozens of people, including a 2-year-old child, injured by the airstrike on Tuesday. But medical personnel say they have been blocked from reaching the site of the attack to help others left behind. Eyewitnesses told the BBC that the Ethiopian Air Force struck a marketplace just 25 kilometers away from Mekelle. The military denies allegations it targeted civilians.
9 Catalan separatists have been released from jails in Spain after being conditionally pardoned by the government in Madrid. They were sentenced to long prison terms for sedition